Chapter 9 of Practical Instruction for Detectives. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Practical Instruction for Detectives by Emerson W. Manning. Chapter 9 Railroad Detective Work. Railroad companies suffer tremendous losses yearly, in spite of the fact that vast sums are continually being spent to guard against theft by employees, thefts by car thieves, damage suits, etc. As to the first mentioned source of loss, railroad companies are obliged to maintain at their freight yards and terminals large forces of detectives to guard against thefts. Although not generally known to persons outside of railroad circles, it is a fact that many roads employ an average of 50 detectives for every 100 miles of their systems. The large railroads nowadays are policed in much the same manner as our large cities. Besides guarding against thefts of valuable freight while in transit, patrons at the crowded stations and depots must be protected so far as possible from the operations of pickpockets, swindlers, and baggage thieves. The smaller stations along the line, where there are ticket offices, must be guarded against attacks by burglars. Practically all large railroads maintain staffs of detectives whose duties are to travel over the lines and do what is called checking. Manipulation of tickets and cash fares is usually prevalent and no doubt will always be, so long as we have railroads and conductors. Trains are checked at regular intervals unknown to train crews. Action of train crews while on duty are reported on by detectives. Also the kind of service accorded patrons of dining, parlor and sleeping cars. In these days when competition is keen, and when railroads are vying with each other to furnish the best possible service, it is important to managements to know, to a certainty, if conductors and other employees are courteous and obliging to patrons, if any rules of the company are being disregarded, and, as a whole, if the kind of service that is intended to give is being given. Checking passenger trains is one of the most congenial branches of detective work, and a branch which gives the young detective plenty of valuable experience. This branch of railroad detective work being the most desirable, I will endeavor to show what managements usually expect from their detectives. The detective may be detailed to check a sleeping car on some particular line from the time of departure of the car from some given point in the evening until it arrives at its destination in the morning. The detective's report will be expected to contain information about as follows: name of the conductor in charge of the car, if the crew got out at stations to assist passengers to board or alight, if the stepping box was properly placed for passengers, if assistance was given with baggage, if the conductor and porter were wearing their proper uniforms, if uniforms were neat, and if the conductor and porter were courteous to passengers, if the car was properly cleaned and dusted, if the porter unnecessarily disturbed the passengers in any way, if all berths were made up properly, and if properly closed in the morning, if the window shades worked properly, if hammocks were properly hung in berths, if the linen was clean and the lights in good order, if the lights were turned out at the proper hour, if any persons at stations disturbed passengers, if any of the crew loafed in any unoccupied berths, if there were any complaints by passengers, and if the complaints were attended to, if ventilation was good and proper temperatures maintained, if any of the crew slept while on duty, if the water and towel supply was proper and sufficient, if there were any accidents during the trip, if porter had shoes properly polished. if passengers were properly brushed by the porter, if any of the crew acted familiarly with passengers, if any of the crew smoked while on duty, if tickets were collected promptly by the conductor, and if railway and hotel guides were in proper places. In addition to the foregoing, the detective usually is required to report on how many berths were occupied in the car, the number of men and number of women passengers, children if any. Also, how many cash fares were collected by the conductor for berths. When reporting on dining car service, detectives usually are expected to cover in their reports the following. If crew was polite and efficient, if conductor was properly uniformed, amount of the detective's check and its number, if linen was in good condition and clean, if tables were properly set, if food was of good quality, if waiters were properly uniformed, if finger bowls were promptly and correctly served, if dining car was properly ventilated and lighted, if liquor was served in the car, if silver was in good condition and prompt service given. The articles of food and drink ordered by the detective should be shown, the number of the table at which he sat, the number of the waiter who served him, the number of the car, the time he left the car, the number of the train, its time of departure and arrival, and between what points travelled. With such daily reports placed in their hands, persons responsible to the managements for proper maintenance of sleeping and dining car service are enabled to know precisely the kind of service that is being given patrons, which information enables them to keep such service to the highest standard of efficiency. Employees often, when coming in from a run, are summarily discharged, or their resignations may be asked for, but that is another matter. Railroads need and must have detectives. It will be seen that the railroads offer a very broad field for detectives, and there is no reason why any young man with good common sense should not be able to properly check a sleeping or dining car on his first attempt. End of Chapter 9. Recording by Jule Niedermeyer.